From the time I was a small boy living in Eugene, Oregon, all I ever wanted was a bicycle. Something about riding fascinated me. I saw cycling as freedom, as adventure, something thrilling and full of possibility. But my parents, always cautious and protective, never allowed it. They believed cycling was too risky. I grew up watching my friends ride past our house, laughing and racing one another down the street. I'd press my face to the window, watching their tires kick up dust as they disappeared around the corner. Inside, it hurt more than I ever admitted. That bike-shaped hole stayed with me for years. When I turned 18, I finally did something about it. I used the money I'd saved from a long summer job to buy my first bicycle. It wasn't flashy, just a simple, reliable mountain bike, but to me, it was everything. From that moment on, cycling became more than a hobby. It became a passion. Every weekend, I was out on the trails, exploring new routes through Oregon's forests and hills. What started as fun quickly became something deeper, an escape. A way to clear my head and reconnect with myself. By October of last year, I was experienced enough to tackle longer, more remote trails. I had done several solo rides by then, each one giving me more confidence than the last. So, on a cool Saturday morning in late October, I set out for a long ride through Took State Forest. The forest was perfect that time of year, quiet, beautiful, and nearly empty. The trees were dressed in their fall colors, and the air had a crispness that made every breath feel clean and sharp. I began my ride around 9 in the morning, carrying a small backpack filled with basic tools, snacks, and a few bottles of water. It was just me, the trail, and the sound of tires crunching over fallen leaves. For hours, everything was peaceful. The path wound gently through tall, towering trees. Leaves drifted down like lazy confetti, blanketing the ground in gold, red, and orange. The beauty of it all made me feel small in the best way possible. Every now and then, I'd pass a hiker or another biker, and we'd nod or exchange a quick hello. But the deeper I went into the forest, the fewer people I saw. By the time noon passed, I realized I hadn't seen another person in almost an hour. That was when I first felt something was wrong with my bike. I stopped immediately and stepped off the bike to check what was wrong. It was a flat tire. Completely unexpected, and deeply inconvenient. I let out a quiet sigh and knelt down on the dirt trail. Unzipping my backpack, I started digging through it, searching for my tire repair kit. The forest around me had fallen into an eerie kind of silence. Even the birds had gone quiet. As I leaned in to inspect the tire more closely, I heard something that made me freeze. Leaves. Crunching. The sound came from behind a thick cluster of bushes, not too far away. My head snapped up. My eyes widened. My heart began to pound. "Hello?" I called out, trying to make my voice sound firm. "Anyone there?" No response. Nothing but stillness. The noise had vanished as suddenly as it had come. I stood frozen for a few seconds, listening, but all I heard was silence. Maybe it was just an animal, I told myself. A deer, or even a squirrel. Trying to shake off the nerves, I gave a short, nervous laugh and turned back to my bike. I focused on removing the tire quickly, trying to patch it up before the unease crept back in. But then, just as I was starting to relax, a sound tore through the quiet. A scream. Distant. Echoing. But unmistakably human. It was sharp. Desperate. Like someone crying out in pain, or fear. I dropped the tools from my hands and shot to my feet. Spinning in every direction, I scanned the trees, the trail, the shadows between the branches. Searching for the source of the scream. But there was nothing. Nothing I could see, yet. My breathing turned rapid. My hands were trembling uncontrollably. The scream never came again, but deep down, I knew, I wasn't alone out here. Then, something shifted in the bushes to my left. I spun around, and a sick, twisting feeling gripped my stomach. Emerging from the thick undergrowth was a man. He was thin, pale, and wore an old black suit that looked like it had been dragged through the dirt. It was torn in several places, hanging off him like it barely fit. His face was ghostly white. His eyes, wide, unblinking, and intense, locked onto mine with a look I'll never forget. He stood completely still. Then, slowly, he raised one thin arm and pointed straight at me. He didn't say a word. Didn't blink. Just pointed, his bony finger aimed right at my chest. I tried to speak, but my voice barely worked. Hey, what's going on? Do you need help? Nothing. He stayed frozen, mouth slightly open, expression blank but somehow still full of menace. The air grew thick. Heavy. My body refused to move. It was like my feet were rooted to the ground. Then, without warning, he opened his mouth wide. And screamed. It was long and shrill, like a call. Not at me, but for someone else. Panic surged through me. I didn't think. I just grabbed my backpack and backed away fast. A flat tire didn't matter anymore. I'd take my chances riding it rather than spend one more second near that man. But the moment I turned, I heard movement. He was coming. I looked back. He had burst out of the bushes, charging straight at me, still screaming. That scream, it was like something broken. Wild and relentless. Pure fear took over. I dropped my bike without a second thought and bolted down the trail on foot. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps, loud, fast, crashing through the leaves and twigs. Getting closer. Closer with every breath. I ran until my lungs felt like fire. My legs ached, but I didn't stop. His scream stayed close, echoing through the trees, impossible to escape. I didn't dare look back. One glance could cost me everything. Up ahead, the trail twisted. My eyes scanned the path wildly, hoping, begging, for someone, anyone to appear. Then, I saw him. A figure. Standing near a large tree. Dressed in camo, holding a rifle. A hunter. I sprinted toward him, gasping for air, my voice hoarse from panic. Please. Help me. Someone's chasing me. The hunter turned quickly, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he saw the terror in my eyes. Without hesitation, the hunter raised his rifle and took aim behind me. A loud crack echoed sharply through the forest as he fired. Then another shot rang out, both aimed high, just above the strange man's head. The sound was deafening in the stillness. But it worked. I heard it immediately. The man behind me had stopped screaming. I stood there, frozen, my chest heaving with every breath. Slowly, I turned and looked over my shoulder. He was gone. Vanished. Just like that. Only the rustling bushes remained, trembling slightly as if something had slipped back into the shadows. The hunter lowered his rifle and stared, just as stunned as I was. "Are you all right?" he asked. I tried to answer, but my voice was shaky, barely working. My entire body was trembling from the adrenaline still surging through me. I nodded, breathing hard, and somehow managed to mutter out a broken, "Thank you." Over and over, I thanked him, struggling to put into words what I had seen. What I had felt. The hunter listened carefully, saying little, but I could tell he believed me. Or at least, he didn't question what I'd experienced. He helped me steady myself, giving me a few moments to breathe. Then he offered to walk with me back to where I'd left my bike. Together, we moved carefully down the trail, both of us alert. His eyes scanned every shadow. His rifle never lowered. When we reached the spot, my bike was still there, just where I had dropped it. The front tire was still flat, half repaired. We worked quickly. I finished patching the tire while he kept watch, never taking his eyes off the surrounding forest. Once the bike was ready, he insisted on walking with me all the way back to the main road. The entire time, his hands never strayed far from his rifle. When we finally reached the edge of the forest, I turned to him again, overwhelmed with gratitude. "Thank you," I said, my voice steadier now. He just nodded. "You should report what happened," he told me. "As soon as you get home." Then he turned and disappeared back into the woods, the same way he'd come, quiet, alert, and watchful. That evening, I did exactly what I promised. I called the police in Cook County and told them everything. To my shock, they didn't seem surprised. An officer explained there had been similar incidents recently, reports of strange people living hidden deep in the forest. Some were homeless individuals, others disturbed souls who had wandered away from society, living in isolation. Some were harmless. Others were dangerously unpredictable. The officer promised to investigate, but I never heard any follow-up. To this day, I have no idea who the strange man was, why he chased me, or why he screamed the way he did. I often wonder, what would have happened if the hunter hadn't been there? After that terrifying day, biking felt different to me. I still love cycling, but the carefree joy I once felt is gone. Now, when I ride, I stick closer to popular paths. The silence of remote forests no longer feels peaceful. Instead, it reminds me of a dangerous world hiding just out of sight. A world I accidentally discovered that October afternoon in Oregon. This happened in the fall of 2022, right after Labor Day, when the soybeans were turning that dusty gold color. That means harvest is close. I live outside the little town of Carlinville, Illinois. Far enough that a street light feels like city life, and the next mailbox is a quarter-mile down the road. We would beat the dark. The first 6 miles felt normal. Cornfield stretched on both sides. Barn swallows swooped low across the road. The quiet rattle of our drivetrains filled the air. But as soon as we reached the reservoir stretch, the evening seemed to hold its breath. Usually, you'd hear frogs croaking or carp splashing in the shallows. That night, there was only the dull grind of our tires and the ticking in my ears from pushing uphill. We coasted into the tree line just as the sun slipped behind the ridge. Long bars of orange light slanted through the tree trunks. The road dipped and climbed like a ribbon thrown across the hills. 2 little rises, then a sweeping left turn, and we came to the biggest hill on the loop. It was a steep crawl, exactly halfway through. Kyle shifted down and stood on his pedals. Halfway up, he eased off, coasting, and raised a hand to signal me to slow down. "Hold up," he said, almost whispering, though there was no one around. At the crest of the hill, maybe 50 feet ahead, a man stood on the gravel shoulder. I remember how the sunset lit the back of his flannel shirt. Faded red squares, edges frayed at the seams. He faced the woods, not the road, as if he'd stepped out of a car that wasn't there, and forgotten what he came for. No backpack. No fishing pole. No leash. His arms dangled too straight, like someone had posed him and then walked away. We rolled closer, freewheeling to keep the noise down. Cell bars vanish the moment you leave the gas station parking lot, and the FM stations dissolve into static soon after. It's the kind of quiet you can feel on your skin. Most evenings, once we clocked out at the grain elevator, my best friend Kyle and I would meet at the edge of town, clip on our helmets, and take off on an old 16-mile loop. It started on County Road 9, cut past 2 retired reservoirs, Lake Anderson and the smaller one locals just call Number 2, then bled into a corridor of second-growth forest that rolled for miles before spitting us back onto flat farmland. We'd ridden it so many times, we could have drawn the cracks in the asphalt from memory. That Tuesday, we left late. The loading dock had backed up, and by the time I got home, inhaled a sandwich, and pedaled to our usual meet-up spot, the sun was already flirting with the tops of the oaks. I almost suggested we bail, but the air was cool enough to see your breath. And after a summer of thick heat, it felt like medicine. Kyle laughed and said, 16 miles is nothing. About 20 feet out, I called, "Hey, everything okay?" There was no response. Not even a twitch. Kyle unclipped his pedals, boots crunching on the gravel, and spoke louder. "Sir, need a hand?" The man's shoulders stayed fixed, but his head turned, just the head, hunched at the neck, until his face floated in profile. At first glance, he looked young. But his skin had a gray cast, like he'd been living under fluorescent lights. His mouth sagged half open. His eyes were shiny, like glass right before dark. They didn't focus on Kyle or me. Instead, they stared past us, as if the horizon was something inside his skull. Then his mouth widened, slowly and silently, until his jaw trembled with the stretch. No breath. No voice. His lips peeled back to reveal a strip of teeth. A tickle of panic raced up my spine, warm and electric. Kyle stepped back so fast his rear wheel slid. "Nope," he said, voice cracking. "We're gone." I clipped back in and pushed hard. We blasted down the far side of the hill, our bikes rattling over frost heaves. My eyes flicked to the mirror on my handlebar, but I saw only trees whipping past. We didn't slow until the pines thinned near Lake Anderson. The first sliver of moon glimmered on the water. Neither of us spoke all the way home. That night, I lay awake, listening to the house breathe. When I finally drifted off, the man's empty stare kept prying my eyes open. Around 3 a.m., I got up. I paced the kitchen, poured a glass of tap water that tasted like iron, and stared out at the soybean field. Just rows of blackness under a milky sky. No reason, but I felt watched. The next afternoon, I told myself I needed proof that it had really happened, that we hadn't misread a harmless hiker. Kyle had a dentist appointment, so I loaded my bike into the truck and drove alone. Storm clouds puddled in the west, and the light felt bruised, more like November than September. I parked at the first reservoir and pedaled the familiar turns. My heartbeat was louder than the wind. When I crested the big hill, the shoulder was empty. But tire skid marks from last night still scarred the asphalt. I stopped and set my bike down. The gravel was powder dry. I spotted a pair of boot impressions, the tread deep where someone had stood. Then a series of scuffs crossed the road and vanished into the underbrush. One heel track dragged as though the foot was being pulled sideways. I pushed through the saplings. 10 feet in, the trees opened into a crude campsite. Rusty beer cans, splinters of pallet wood, and a circle of rocks blackened by old fires. But the ash inside was heaped into a neat cone, almost sculpted. Scattered through it were bones, finger-thin, curved, rabbit, maybe, or cat. Hard to tell. Above the ring, a length of weather-bleached rope hung from a maple branch. Both ends frayed. One still knotted. It swung a little, though the air was dead still. I heard a cracking twig deeper in the woods and bolted back to my bike. My calves burned on the climb, and my throat was coated with the metallic taste of pennies. I didn't stop until the truck's cab swallowed me and the doors were locked. That evening, I relayed every detail to Kyle over the phone. He listened without interrupting, then whispered, "I haven't been sleeping either." He said that each night around 2 a.m., he heard leaves crunch outside his window, slow, deliberate steps. His bedroom was on the second floor, 12 feet above the flower bed. 2 days passed. On Friday after work, Kyle swung by my place, looking pale. He'd driven the loop during daylight, hoping to see normal joggers or find evidence we'd overreacted. Instead, he found a white cargo van nosed into the ditch about a quarter-mile from the hill. The side door faced the trees. The windshield was camouflaged by branches someone had snapped off. There were no plates. The back doors had no glass, just dented metal. He'd taken a photo, then called the sheriff's office from town. Deputies promised to check it out. When Kyle drove that way the next morning, road dust still lay undisturbed, but the van was gone. All that remained were twin indentations in the grass and a rectangle of bare dirt where something heavy had sat. The next week drifted by in fragments. Work, restless nights, cancelled rides. I cleaned my chain 3 times with no miles on the odometer. We told ourselves it would fade, that the world was mostly good. Yet, I kept the curtains shut. Kyle slept downstairs on the couch with a baseball bat. Late September, a post popped up on the Macoupin County Community Board. A cell phone dusk shot. A 2-lane road flanked by trees. Headlights spilled across a lone figure walking the shoulder. Even pixelated, you could make out the drooped arms, the pale face tilted toward the sky, and the red patchwork of a flannel shirt. The caption read, "Saw this guy on Route 9 near the reservoirs last night. Anyone missing a relative?" Comments piled up. Jokes. 2 people said they'd seen him, too. Then the thread vanished within the hour. The admin claimed it violated privacy. Maybe somebody asked them to make it disappear. Kyle and I don't bike that loop anymore. We changed routes, started riding earlier, and sometimes stick to the gravel lanes where we can see a mile in every direction. But some evenings, when the sun hits the cornrows just right, I think about that shoulder. I wonder if another rider is climbing that hill right now, finding a stranger fixed to the spot like a forgotten scarecrow. What unsettles me most are the ordinary things that stayed unexplained. The cone of ashes, too neatly stacked. The bones sorted, like someone was counting. The rope's cut ends bobbing in motionless air. None of it screamed supernatural. It just whispered human, which somehow feels worse. Every fall brings the same copper leaves, the same circuit hush after harvest. That road is still there, winding over those hills, pretending it's just another peaceful stretch of Illinois nothingness. And maybe that's how it will stay. Quiet, empty, waiting for winter to erase the tracks. But some nights, when the house is silent and my pulse thumps in my throat, I hear gravel shift in my memory. I picture a man in a threadbare flannel. His head cocked too far, mouth opening to swallow silence, eyes reflecting nothing at all. You can dismiss a story, delete a post, tow a van, but you can't unmake a place. County Road 9 keeps its own secrets. Anyone pedaling into those woods after sunset is only borrowing a piece. One day, I'm afraid the road might want something back. Ever since I was a little boy, cycling has been my favorite thing. I remember my dad buying me my first bicycle when I turned 6. I loved the feeling of freedom that came from riding around our small town in West Virginia. Years later, at the age of 24, cycling was still my biggest hobby. I enjoyed taking long rides alone, exploring new places, especially around the beautiful hilly countryside that surrounded our area. In September of last year, I decided to take one of these long solo rides through the quiet hills near Elkins, West Virginia. It was one of those cool autumn mornings when the air felt fresh and crisp. I set out around 8 o'clock in the morning, planning to spend most of the day enjoying the scenery and the peace of nature. After about 2 hours of riding along well-known trails, I spotted a narrow path that seemed like it could save me some time. I stopped for a moment to look at my map. The shortcut wasn't clearly marked, but from what I could see, it seemed to reconnect with my original route. Deciding to take a chance, I turned my bike onto the narrow dirt trail and headed into the thickening woods. The path quickly became overgrown, and soon it was clear no one had used it in a long time. The trees grew denser, blocking most of the daylight, leaving me riding in a dim, eerie twilight. Branches scraped my arms as I pedaled carefully, trying not to lose my balance. The silence around me was heavy. The only sounds I could hear were my breathing and the crunch of leaves under my tires. After about 30 minutes of riding, the path suddenly opened up into a large clearing. At the center stood a tall fence, old and rusted, but still intact. Behind it, I saw a sprawling piece of land with an old wooden building in the distance. There were no signs or markers, nothing indicating who owned the property or what it was for. It seemed completely abandoned except for the fence enclosing it. Feeling uneasy, I decided to turn back. Just as I started turning my bike around, I heard something, a faint rustling sound coming from the trees. I quickly glanced around, but the thick foliage made it impossible to see clearly. I thought maybe it was just an animal, perhaps a deer or a raccoon. Still, my heart began to beat faster. I got back on my bike and started pedaling slowly down the path I'd come from. After only a few moments, I stopped again. This time, I heard footsteps crunching on leaves, moving parallel to me but hidden in the trees. My throat tightened, and I felt cold sweat on my forehead. The idea that someone was watching me filled me with dread. I shouted nervously, "Hello, is someone there?" My voice echoed slightly, but there was no response, only silence. Feeling anxious, I pedaled faster, desperately wanting to get back to the main trail. But as I sped up, I heard the footsteps again, now clearly keeping pace with me through the trees. After a few minutes of riding faster than I thought possible, my tire hit a sharp rock hidden under the leaves. I lost control. My bike slid out from beneath me, and I crashed heavily onto the trail. My elbow and knees burned as I scraped across dirt and stones. I lay still for a moment, stunned by the fall. Quickly, I sat up and checked myself. I was bleeding from several small cuts, but thankfully, nothing seemed broken. As I stood and dusted myself off, the unmistakable sound of footsteps approached again. Panic gripped me. I turned toward the noise, heart pounding in my chest. About 30 feet away, standing just at the edge of the trail, was a man dressed in worn-out hunting clothes. His face was rough, partially hidden by a thick, tangled beard. In his hands, he held a rifle, pointed downwards. He didn't say a word. He simply stared at me with cold, unreadable eyes that felt like they pierced right through me. My voice shook as I called out again, "I'm sorry. I didn't realize this was private property. I was just trying to find a shortcut." Still, the man said nothing. Instead, he raised his rifle slightly, not pointing it directly at me, but making it clear he knew how to use it. The silence from him was somehow more terrifying than if he had yelled or threatened me. Without thinking further, I grabbed my bike and started pushing it down the trail as fast as I could, ignoring the sharp pain from my wounds. My heart was hammering so hard it felt like it might explode. I didn't dare look behind me. I could hear him following slowly, steadily, keeping pace in the woods just beside the trail. Every second felt like an eternity. My legs trembled with exhaustion, but adrenaline kept me moving. After what seemed like forever, I finally saw the opening of the trail ahead. The original route visible beyond the trees. Relief surged through me, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. With one last burst of strength, I jumped onto my bike and pedaled frantically toward the open road. As I emerged onto the main trail, I glanced back one more time. The man stood silently at the edge of the woods, just watching me. He didn't follow further, but the coldness in his stare stayed with me as I sped away. When I finally got home that evening, shaken and bruised, I called the police to report what had happened. After explaining everything, an officer told me I had likely wandered onto land owned by a recluse. This local man was rumored to have driven others away violently. Apparently, he'd become fiercely protective of his property after hunters repeatedly trespassed over the years. But then the officer shared something that sent a deeper chill through me. No one had seen or spoken to this man in months. Some suspected he might have vanished, or even died alone out there. The weeks after that day were difficult. Every time I tried to ride my bike again, the memory of those cold, watchful eyes returned. It took months before I could comfortably ride alone again. And even then, I stuck close to populated areas and familiar paths. Friends and family assured me I was safe, but deep inside, I never completely believed them. In late November, nearly 2 months after my terrifying encounter, I stopped by a local coffee shop in Elkins, West Virginia, after work. As I sat drinking coffee and reading the local newspaper, a headline caught my attention. It read, "Local authorities search for missing hunter in remote hills." Curious and uneasy, I kept reading. The article detailed how a hunter named Albert Thompson had disappeared several months earlier. He owned a secluded property in the hills, the very same hills where I'd had my frightening experience. According to the paper, Albert had lived there alone for many years, rarely seen or heard from by neighbors. The police had gone to his property after receiving a tip from worried locals. But when they arrived, the house was empty, showing signs of long-term abandonment. As I read on, a strange feeling settled over me. The police had found scattered belongings in the woods surrounding the house. There were discarded clothes, empty rifle cartridges, and a hunting rifle propped against a tree trunk, rusted from exposure. What made my stomach twist, however, was the date the rifle was discovered, September 28th. Exactly the day I had encountered that silent, menacing figure in the woods. I sat in stunned silence, wondering who, or what, I had actually seen out there. If Albert Thompson had disappeared months earlier, then who had followed me through the forest that day? The police never located Albert Thompson. His disappearance remained a mystery, slowly fading into local legend as the months passed. I tried to move on, telling myself it was probably just a stranger illegally occupying the land. But I couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something far worse had happened out there. Winter arrived, blanketing West Virginia in snow and ice. I kept busy, doing my best to avoid thinking about what I'd seen in the woods. I pushed the memories to the back of my mind. Eventually, life began to feel somewhat normal again. I cycled less often, but when I did, I was cautious, always staying close to familiar areas and riding only with others or along well-known routes. Then, in March of this year, I got a call from a friend named Luke. He's an avid hunter and knows the region better than anyone I know. He told me that he and a couple of others were planning to hike through the same area near Albert Thompson's property during hunting season. When I hesitated, Luke immediately picked up on it. "What's wrong?" he asked. Reluctantly, I told him the entire story. Every detail poured out, and deep down, I hoped it would convince him to stay away from that place. But instead of reacting with disbelief, Luke fell silent. After a moment, he finally said, "You're not the first person who's had a strange experience near Thompson's land." His voice was lower now, more serious. "My grandfather used to tell stories," he continued, "about hunters who went missing in those woods, even decades ago. Sometimes their gear would be found weeks later, left in random places. Abandoned. No explanation." He paused again, then added quietly. "People always blamed Albert, but there was never any real proof." Another pause. "Some folks around here," he said, "think there's something wrong with those woods. Something that doesn't want visitors." I felt a chill run through me, even though I was sitting safely at home. Luke wasn't the kind of person who scared easily, and he certainly wasn't one to exaggerate stories just to make a point. His words stayed with me. They brought back a wave of anxiety, along with a question I hadn't let myself ask before. Could something darker than a reclusive landowner have been hiding in those hills? Not long after that call, Luke's hunting group canceled their plans. After our conversation, none of them felt safe going into that part of the woods. That gave me a small measure of comfort, knowing my experience might have spared someone else from danger. Still, I haven't cycled that far into the hills since then. And I don't know if I ever will again.